He spoke her true name before the elders. Now their bond cannot be broken by law or death. The twin sons of Veros bled through the fractured glass of the dome, painting the alien bazaar in slanted colors of rust and gold. The air shimmered with smoke from burning resins, sweet and choking, while vendors shouted in 100 languages, some with mouths, others with the hollow chimes of wind organs stitched into their skin. Human voices were rare here, and when they did rise above the noise, they were not welcome. Darren Miles walked among them like a shadow pressed too tightly into the light. His boots left no echo on the stone floor, worn smooth by centuries of trade. Once he had walked in starships lined with banners, his voice carrying the weight of human diplomacy. Once his name had opened doors in alien palaces. Now he bartered for scraps and stale water, his credits dwindling like dust through cracked fingers. They still whispered about him sometimes, the man who broke the accord, the one who let 10,000 burn. He carried the shame like an iron plate riveted into his chest. He didn't argue anymore. He didn't correct the stories. He had stopped defending himself years ago because silence was simpler, and silence hurt less than hope. The market pulled him because it was loud enough to drown out his thoughts. 100 stalls leaned inward, their cloth awnings stitched from hides of creatures with scales like glass. Traders displayed wares that shimmered unnaturally, vials of glowing sap, knives that hummed like insects, relics stolen from worlds no human chart had ever named. And in the center of it all moved the Veirathi, tall, veiled figures, cloaked in silks the color of the storm sky. They were a people of ritual and shadow. Their clan never showed skin in public, never spoke names outside sacred circles. Eyes glimmered from beneath veils like shards of obsidian, watching without blinking. To speak the true name of a Veirathi was to claim responsibility for their life, for their death, for every path they walked. Even Darren, in exile, knew that law. He had no intention of crossing them. But fate, he thought bitterly, had a way of drawing his mouth faster than his judgment. The encounter came like an accident. He had been drawn to a stall draped in black silk where a merchant displayed crystalline vials. Each vial held liquid fire, colors that seemed alive. The price was absurd, but Darren wasn't there to buy. He stared because the colors reminded him of what stars looked like from the bridge of a fleet ship before everything had crumbled. Someone brushed past him, soft, deliberate, but firm enough that he staggered a half step. He turned, ready with a half apology, and saw her. She was taller than most Veirathi. Her veil dyed not black but a stormy silver. Her cloak swayed like smoke, and beneath its hem, a tail of living muscle and bone slipped into view, scaled faintly in violet light. It moved with unconscious precision, balancing her, brushing against the floor with the grace of something both animal and regal. For a moment he forgot how to breathe. The bazaar around him drowned into a blur of noise and color. It was motion distilled into silence, and when her eyes lifted from beneath the veil, they caught his like hooks. They weren't just dark, they had depth, like falling into night itself. And that was when he said it. He didn't know why the word leapt to his tongue. Perhaps it slipped from memory, a fragment from a dream. Perhaps the bond had been waiting since before he entered the market. But his mouth opened, and his voice cut through the chaos. Celeri! The name echoed, soft yet piercing. A stone dropped into the silence. The world stopped. Every sound in the bazaar seemed to collapse. Traders froze, voices cut short. Even the smoke halted mid-curl. Hundreds of eyes turned to him, alien, hostile, disbelieving. He felt their weight like spears aimed at his throat. The veiled woman, Celeri, stood utterly still. He saw her breath catch, the faintest tremor in her shoulders. Her tail went rigid, coiled like a weapon. Beneath the veil, her lips parted in shock. You, her voice was hushed thunder, a whisper meant for him alone. You cannot know that name. Darren felt his throat dry, the mistake burning in his chest. But it wasn't a mistake. He had spoken it as though he had always known it, as though it belonged on his tongue. His voice cracked. I don't know why I said it, but the crowd had already begun to murmur. He spoke her true name. The law is clear. Blood or bond, nothing else. The first hand seized his shoulder, clawed fingers digging into fabric. Another grabbed his arm. He didn't resist. He knew resistance would mean knives in his ribs, his body left to rot in the market gutters. The Verathi moved with terrifying unity, voices rising in a single chant that made the walls of the dome tremble. Law of the name, law of the bond, law of the blood. Saleri took a step back, but her eyes never left him. Her veil fluttered with each sharp breath, and for a heartbeat, Darren thought he saw something human beneath the ritual, some glimmer of fear. The tribunal would come. He knew it. They would drag him before the elders, and there the choice would be laid like a blade across his throat. Marriage or death, all because of a single word. As they pulled him through the market, he thought of how his life had narrowed, year by year, until only ashes were left. Maybe this was just the final cut, the last humiliation. Maybe he deserved it. But as the chanting thundered around him, he risked a glance at Saleri. Her hands were trembling. Her eyes burned not with hatred, but with something heavier. A prison of duty. A storm behind glass. And Darren Miles, disgraced and broken, realized that whatever came next, bond or blade, it would not only be his life decided in that circle. Hers hung in the balance too. The market closed behind him like a mouth swallowing light, and the silence that followed was heavier than chains. The chamber was carved from stone older than the human calendar, a circle of obsidian pillars, veined with violet fire. The bazaar's noise had been left behind. Here there was only silence, heavy as a tomb. Darren Miles knelt in the center, wrists bound in copper rings that hummed faintly against his skin. The rings weren't merely metal. They pressed on his thoughts, dulling them, making it hard to speak without feeling his words weighed and judged. Around him sat the elders of the Verathi, draped in veils darker than night. Their eyes gleamed through narrow slits, unblinking. Every movement of theirs was ritualized. Hands folded, backs straight, voices quiet but resonant like drums muffled beneath cloth. Above them, carved into the ceiling, spiraled the script of their law. He didn't understand it fully, but he didn't have to. Its meaning was already carved into his bones. Speak a name, accept the bond, or spill your blood. Saleri stood apart from them, veiled in silver rather than black. The only color in the room. Her hands were clasped in front of her, but he saw how her knuckles whitened beneath her gloves. She was trembling, not visibly to her kin, but he could see it. The bond that had been spoken tied them in ways unseen, pulling faint sensations across the gulf between them. Her fear prickled like static in his chest. One elder leaned forward, their voice a hiss of wind across stone. You spoke her name. Darren swallowed. His throat was raw, but he forced sound through it. I don't know how. I didn't plan it. Names are not accidents. Another voice, low and certain. They are the soul. You carry responsibility now. The copper rings hummed harder, pressing down on him until his vision blurred. He wanted to say more, that he hadn't meant harm, that he barely understood their customs. But each word crawled like it weighed 1,000 pounds. He lowered his gaze because the truth was harder. He didn't even know if he wanted to live long enough to fight them. The elders began a chant, a weaving of syllables that thrummed against the walls. The copper shackles glowed faintly in time with the sound, pulsing like a heartbeat. Blood or bond? Choose. Darren's lips cracked into a bitter smile. Some choice. One of the elders hissed sharply at the tone, but before they could speak, Saleri's voice cut through the chamber. Enough. The chant faltered. Heads turned toward her. Even the copper at Darren's wrist fell silent. She stepped forward, the silver of her veil catching the violet fire from the pillars. Her voice shook, but she carried it like a blade. He is human. He knows not our law. He did not claim me. He spoke without understanding. To bind him now is mockery of justice. The elders stared, but none spoke. The silence itself was judgment. Darren lifted his head slightly. She's defending me? He hadn't expected that. Not after the way the bazaar had turned. Not after the whispers of execution. He searched her eyes, but they were hidden beneath the veil's shadow. Still, the bond tugged faintly, carrying a whisper of her thoughts. I don't want this. But there was something else under it too. Not hatred, not disgust, something heavier. The elders finally answered, voices layered like stone on stone. The law is not mercy. The law is not choice. The law binds us because without it, we are ash and ruin. The human spoke. The bond is written. One rose, taller than the rest, voice deep as thunder. If he refuses, his blood shall sanctify the market where he blasphemed. The copper shackles grew hot, biting into his wrists. Darren closed his eyes. He could almost see it. The blade, the crowd, his body falling in silence. It wouldn't be the first time his death had been considered useful. But then Solari's voice cut through again, sharp as breaking glass. Then I demand the right of veins. The chamber rippled with whispers. Even through the dull ache of the shackles, Darren felt the words strike like lightning. The elders shifted for the first time, veils trembling. The one who had stood leaned closer. You would invoke the right for this outsider? Solari's chin lifted. If he must be bound, then let the bond be tested. Let his blood touch mine, and let the circle decide if it holds. If he is unworthy, the bond will shatter, and the law will be satisfied. The elders were silent a long time. At last the thunder-voiced one said, So be it, the rite of veins will be performed. Darren's shackles snapped open. The copper fell to the floor with a hiss, leaving angry welts around his wrists. He flexed his hands slowly, blood rushing back into his fingers. He looked at Solari, and though her veil hid her face, he could feel her eyes on him. He wanted to ask her why. Why defend him? Why risk herself for a stranger? But the bond tugged again, and he already knew part of the answer. She didn't want this any more than he did. They were taken to a smaller chamber lit by bioluminescent vines curling through cracks in the ceiling. The floor was a circle of polished obsidian, etched with concentric rings like ripples frozen in stone. In the center, two shallow basins were carved side by side. Solari stood opposite him, silent as the elders prepared the ritual. One placed a knife of transparent bone in her hand. Another pressed a second knife into his. The blades were cold, humming faintly, as if alive. Cut the vein, an elder intoned. Let the blood fall. If the circle accepts, the bond is sealed. If it rejects, the bond dies, and so shall he. Solari's hands didn't tremble as she pressed the blade to her palm. The fabric of her glove split with a whisper, and dark violet blood welled, rich as wine. It dripped into the basin, glowing faintly as it touched the stone. Darren stared at his own knife. His reflection stared back, sunken eyes, beard ragged, skin weathered by dust and exile. This wasn't the man who had once stood in councils of power. This was a shadow, a ghost. Maybe this was how it ended. A mistake in a marketplace, blood spilled for a name that wasn't his to know. He almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but then he looked at her. Solari's eyes, visible now through a shift in the veil, burned like stormlight. Not pleading, not commanding, simply waiting. Her gaze was steady, as though daring him to choose. Darren lifted the knife and drew it across his palm. The sting was sharp, cleansing. Blood welled, crimson against the pale of his skin, and fell into the basin beside hers. The stone drank it, veins of red and violet twining together. The circle flared with sudden light, ripples pulsing outward until the entire chamber glowed. The air grew thick. Darren staggered as something unseen wrapped around his mind, sinking into the marrow of his thoughts. Memories slipped loose without permission. Faces of the dead, screams of civilians during the failed accord, the smell of burning hull plating, his guilt, raw and unhidden, spilled like an open wound. And in the same instant, he felt her. Solari's memories bled into him. Childhood drills where she was taught to never speak without permission. Years of being paraded as a bargaining piece for alliances. The weight of a future chosen long before she could claim it. He felt her anger, her loneliness, the suffocation of being nothing but a name to her people. Their eyes locked, and for a breathless moment, they were stripped bare, everything laid open between them. The circle pulsed once more, and settled. The elders' voices rose. The bond holds. The law is satisfied. Solari flinched as though struck. Darren felt the echo through the bond, a cage snapping shut. He looked down at his bleeding palm, then at hers. Their blood mingled in the basins, glowing brighter with each heartbeat. No matter what they wanted, no matter what they chose, the law had bound them. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the shame and resentment, Darren realized the bond wasn't just chains. It was connection. For the first time in years, someone else knew his truth and hadn't turned away. When they left the chamber, the bazaar had fallen silent. Every eye followed them, veiled or unmasked. Whispers rippled through the crowd like fire. Bonded. The human spoke her name, bound by blood. Darren kept his gaze down, but he could feel Solari's tension beside him, the bond quivering with each step. He didn't know where this path led, death, exile, something worse. But he knew it wasn't hers alone to carry anymore. And as the doors closed behind them, sealing the murmurs into the dark, he heard her voice in his mind, soft but unyielding. I never wanted this. He answered without words, only with the hollow ache of his guilt. Neither did I. Yet the bond pulsed between them, steady as a heartbeat, undeniable. The bond did not sleep. Even after the rite of veins, when the elders dismissed them into the cold corridors of the clan citadel, the presence lingered. Darren felt it like a second heartbeat pressed against his ribs, alien, steady, unwilling to fade. Thoughts that weren't his own drifted through the edges of his mind. Fragments of scent, flashes of light, a faint rhythm that reminded him of the way Solari's tail swayed in balance when she walked. He hated it, not because it was invasive, but because it felt intimate, as if someone had taken the walls he had built out of guilt and silence and torn them open. He had lived for years in the quiet of his disgrace, and now she was there. Solari walked ahead of him, silent beneath her veil, her silver cloak brushing the floor like water. Guards flanked them, but none dared to speak. The rite had sealed the bond. They were no longer merely prisoner and accuser. They were bound. Even the guards seemed unsettled by it. Finally, when the last of the footsteps faded behind them, and they reached the corridor where the stone turned to glass windows overlooking the city, she spoke. Her voice was low, tight, like she was holding a blade between her teeth. You should not have survived that. Darren blinked. I didn't exactly have a choice. You misunderstand. She turned, veil catching the violet glow of the city lights beyond the glass. The circle rejects those it deems unworthy. It kills the bond before it begins. But it did not reject you. There was accusation in her tone, but also something else, a tremor of fear. Darren exhaled slowly. Then maybe your circle's broken. I'm not exactly worthy of anything. The bond pulsed between them, and he felt her reaction before he saw it. A flicker of shock, a flare of anger, and then sorrow. You carry guilt like armor, she said softly. But armor does not make you unworthy. It makes you dangerous. He almost laughed, but the sound died in his throat. The words stung because they were too close to truth. They were taken to a chamber at the edge of the citadel, a place that looked more like a cell than quarters. The walls were smooth obsidian, but narrow slits let in the violet glow of the city below. 2 mats were laid on opposite sides, nothing more. The guards left them, sealing the door with a resonant thrum of energy. Darren sat heavily on one mat, ignoring the ache in his hand where the knife had cut him. The wound had already sealed into a thin scar, glowing faintly red where his blood had mingled with hers. He glanced at Celeri, who stood motionless by the window, veil drawn close. Finally, he said, "I didn't want this any more than you. If there's a way to break it, there isn't." Her voice was flat, final. He clenched his jaw. Figures. Silence stretched, but silence wasn't silence anymore. Not with the bond. Every flicker of her emotion brushed against him. He tried to shut it out, but it was like trying to stop feeling heat from a fire. And then the fire came for real. It began with a sound, sharp, metallic, too deliberate to be an accident. Darren's soldier instincts, long dulled by exile, snapped awake. He rose as shadows moved in the window slits. The hum of energy weapons primed. "Down!" he barked, and before she could protest, he grabbed Celeri's arm and pulled her to the floor. A bolt of white plasma tore through the chamber, scorching a line of molten glass where her head had been. The window exploded inward. Figures in black scale armor dropped through the smoke, masks glowing faint green. Assassins, half a dozen, moving with the precision of predators. Their blades shimmered with heat, built for cutting through bone and veil alike. Celeri's tail lashed out instinctively, knocking the first attacker off balance. Darren moved without thought, diving for the fallen assassin's weapon. His body remembered what his mind had tried to forget: the drills, the combat reflexes, the fury of survival. He rolled to his feet, firing a burst that sent one figure crashing into the wall in a spray of sparks. Two more closed on Celeri. He flowed around them, silver veil flashing like a storm. Her blade flicked from beneath her cloak, curved, jagged, alive with violet fire. She struck fast, carving arcs of light through the smoke, and one assassin crumpled, tail severed, mask sparking. Darren blocked another strike, heat searing his arm. Pain flared, sharp and cleansing. He twisted, slammed the butt of the plasma rifle into the assassin's mask, and felt bone crunch beneath. The bond surged. For a heartbeat, their minds locked. Not just emotions, but instincts. He felt her calculating his angle of attack, and she felt his muscle memory snapping into action. They moved together without speaking, covering gaps, anticipating blows, fighting as if they had trained side by side for years. Celeri's blade crossed his rifle's arc, cutting down an enemy he hadn't seen. He shoved another toward her, and her tail swept its legs from beneath it before her knife pierced its throat. When the last assassin fell, the chamber stank of ozone and burning flesh. Sparks crackled from the shattered glass. They stood in the wreckage, chests heaving, blood mingling with smoke. The bond pulsed like fire in their veins, hot, insistent, alive. Darren lowered the rifle slowly. "Friends of yours?" Celeri's veil shifted with her heavy breathing. "No. Enemies of the law. Or of me. Perhaps both." Her voice trembled, and through the bond he felt the truth. Fear, not of death, but of what this attack meant. Darren's jaw tightened. "Then they'll try again." "Yes. And your elders? Will they protect you?" She laughed, bitter and soft. "The elders protect only the law. If the bond dies with me, they will call it balance." He stared at her, the pieces falling into place. She wasn't just caught in tradition. She was marked, hunted. And now so was he. They dragged the bodies into the corner, covering them with shattered glass and cloth. There was no point in hiding, but it gave them a moment to breathe. Darren slumped against the wall, the rifle still in his hands. Celeri sat across from him, her blade resting across her knees. Silence again, but not empty. The bond was thrumming, still resonant from the fight. He felt the echo of her movements in his muscles, the rhythm of her breath in his lungs. It unsettled him, yet there was something addictive about it. The way they had moved as one, the way trust had been forced between them. Finally, Celeri broke the silence. "You fought well. For an exile." Darren smirked faintly. "Didn't know you cared." Her tail twitched, betraying irritation. "I do not, but the bond, it sharpened you. I felt it. He exhaled. I felt it too, like we were connected. Her gaze lifted, and for the first time he saw her eyes fully in the dim light. They weren't just dark, they shimmered faintly violet, storm and shadow woven together. You should not mistake connection for choice, she said quietly. This is not love. This is law. Chains of fire and glass. He met her gaze steadily. Maybe, but chains can still break. Something flickered in her eyes, doubt or hope, he couldn't tell. The bond pulsed once more, and he felt her struggle like it was his own. She wanted freedom, but she didn't believe it existed. And in that moment, Darren realized his own survival was tied not just to fighting assassins or appeasing elders. It was tied to her, to breaking her chains and maybe his own. The door shuddered then, voices rising beyond it. The guards had finally come, too late but not empty-handed. Scileri rose, veil settling once more around her face. Her blade gleamed faintly, dripping assassin blood. She looked down at Darren, her voice steady now. They will not see this as an attack. They will see it as a test. They will tighten the cage. Darren pushed to his feet, rifle slung against his shoulder. Then we don't let them. The bond pulsed again. Agreement, reluctant but fierce. Outside, the citadel stirred with whispers and the promise of more blood. Inside, two unwilling partners stood together, not yet allies, not yet enemies, but bound by fire and glass, chains that neither law nor death would easily break. Darren felt as if the night had swallowed the entire outpost in a blanket of steel and shadow. The corridors, once buzzing with distant machinery, now seemed alive only with whispers of their own footsteps, echoing endlessly against cold walls. His own shadow, once a familiar companion, now seemed to follow him with a weight he couldn't shake, heavier with every heartbeat. Scileri's masked face emerged from the dim light, partially obscured, yet her eyes gleamed with a story she had never fully told. Not just survival, not just defiance, but years of silent burden, of traditions that had suffocated her even as they shaped her. Darren's chest tightened as he took a step closer. Each footfall was a silent question, an unspoken plea for truth. Darren, Scileri's voice trembled, soft but carrying the weight of old scars. I need to tell you everything, more than you've seen, more than what my mask hides, more than what I've ever let anyone see. Darren met her gaze, feeling the unspoken storm behind her words. The space between them crackled, not just with danger, but with honesty. Scileri, he said, voice low and steady, you can trust me. I won't run. I have my own past, my own failures. I won't hide them from you. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she struggled to form the words, her hands tightening around the edge of the table she leaned on. My clan, they don't just protect me. They define me. They demand obedience, loyalty, perfection. I've lived my whole life under their rules, under their eyes. Every choice, every step, measured, calculated. The mask, it isn't just to hide me from the world. It's to hide me from them, from my own self. Darren nodded slowly, letting her words sink in. He understood. Not fully, perhaps, but enough to feel the weight of it. I know what it's like to be trapped by expectations, he admitted quietly. I've carried mistakes that haunt every decision I make. I've let people down, people I swore to protect. Every day feels like I'm trying to outrun my own guilt. Scileri's eyes softened, yet glimmered with something dangerous. Truths that could pierce deeper than any blade. You think your guilt makes you human. I think my duty made me something else entirely. I've killed in obedience, watched the powerless suffer, and I told myself it was necessary. But each act left ashes in me. Ashes I could never burn away, only hide under this mask. Darren swallowed hard, the room suddenly too small for the intensity between them. I understand more than you think. I lost a squad once because of a choice I made too late. I carry that weight every day. Sometimes I wonder if I deserve to keep walking forward, if I deserve anything. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until Solari finally stepped closer. Close enough that Darren could feel the faint pulse of life beneath her mask, the subtle heat radiating from her presence. "You see," she whispered, her voice a trembling flame, "we are both prisoners in different ways. You of your guilt, and I of traditions that were never meant for me. And yet, somehow, here we are." A flicker of movement outside caught Darren's eye, and instinctively he reached for her, a protective gesture, though not touching yet. "Here we are," he repeated, voice firmer this time, "and I'm not leaving. Not now. Not ever." Solari's hands trembled slightly, brushing against the side of his arm, a silent acknowledgement of the fragile connection they were forging in that dark, empty corridor. "I've lived alone behind the walls of expectation," she said. "I've learned to trust nothing. Not the air, not the ground, not even myself. And now I'm supposed to trust you?" Darren's lips twitched, half smile, half grimace. "Trust is earned, yes. But maybe it's enough to start by not running." Her gaze searched his, deep and unyielding. Then slowly the mask tilted, just enough that Darren could glimpse a scar tracing her jawline, a map of battles fought in silence. "I've carried my family's weight for too long," she confessed. "And every lie, every hidden truth, it's all been to survive and not break completely. I'm not strong in the way they think I am. I am fractured. I am," her voice broke, "tired." Darren felt a pang, recognizing the reflection of his own exhaustion in her words. "Then maybe it's time to let some of that weight go," he said softly. "Let someone else see the cracks. Let someone else carry part of the fire with you. I'll bear some of it, I swear." Solari studied him, measuring the honesty in his tone against the scars of her own life. She inhaled sharply, a sound like brittle leaves. "You really think you can bear it?" she asked, voice almost breaking. "I don't just think it," Darren said. "I will. And even if I fail, even if I falter, I'll never walk away." The confession hung between them, a fragile bridge across the chasm of their past. For the first time in years, Solari felt the possibility of trust. Not full, not unshakable, but enough to let a fraction of herself exist outside the shadows. Hours seemed to pass in the silence, punctuated only by their breathing, their thoughts colliding like distant storms. Finally, Solari stepped back, mask straightened, eyes still locked on his. "Then we move forward, together," she said. "But know this, tradition dies hard. My clan will come for us, and the ashes of what I leave behind, they may burn hotter than any blade." Darren nodded, the weight of reality settling over them. "I'll stand through the fire," he said, "with you." In that moment, the corridor was no longer just a path between shadows. It became a crucible. Their confessions, their vulnerabilities, their shared burdens forged a bond that neither death nor tradition could easily sever. And outside, the world continued in ignorance. But inside, two fractured souls had begun to merge, tentatively, into something stronger than fear. The air was thick with ash and the distant hum of distant storms. Voyager Prime had never felt so silent, yet so heavy, as if the planet itself were holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Darren and Solari moved cautiously through the ruins of the old village, remnants of her clan's ancestral homes scattered like shattered memories. Each step stirred dust and echoes, reminders of what had been lost, and what might yet be destroyed. Solari's mask caught the dim light of the fading sun, casting a spectral glow across her features. But tonight it wasn't just a mask, it was a shield, a boundary between herself and the world, between herself and Darren. And yet she let him follow close, their proximity a silent testament to the trust and the danger between them. "They're here," Solari whispered, voice taut with controlled fear. Her hands tightened around the haft of a jagged staff, an old weapon she had carried since childhood. "They'll stop at nothing to reclaim what they call tradition, to reclaim me." Darren nodded, his own pulse steady despite the tension. Then we stop them first? Together. His hand hovered near her back, a silent offer of support without overstepping. We've come too far to falter now. The first figures emerged from the shadows of the crumbling dwellings, clan enforcers, eyes burning with the zeal of generations. Their approach was deliberate, ritualistic almost, as if each step carried centuries of expectation. Solari's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet she stood firm, shoulders squared, mask hiding the trembling within. You shouldn't have returned, the lead enforcer said, voice sharp as flint. You know the law. You know the consequences. I know, Solari replied, her tone steady, almost defiant. And I choose my path now, not the one you dictate. A tense silence followed, broken only by the wind whispering through the ruins. Then, without warning, the enforcers moved in unison, a living wave of authority and menace. Darren stepped forward, staff raised, every fiber of his being poised for the confrontation. The clash was brutal but precise. Darren moved with calculated force, protecting Solari while deflecting blows that would have torn them both apart. Solari, for her part, fought with the fury of a lifetime of repression, each strike a release of years spent under watchful eyes. They were not perfect, not invincible, but together they were relentless. Amid the chaos, Solari caught a glimpse of her past in the eyes of one attacker, a reflection of indoctrination and fear she had long tried to forget. With a surge of resolve, she disarmed him, voice trembling yet firm. I am not yours. I never was. Darren's gaze met hers in that instant, a silent acknowledgement of shared struggle, a bond forged in fire. He pressed forward, covering her as she moved through the shadows, guiding her toward a narrow path leading out of the village. But the clan was persistent. More enforcers appeared, surrounding them in a tightening ring. Solari's grip on her staff faltered. Exhaustion, fear, and the weight of responsibility pressed down on her. Darren, she whispered, almost breaking. I can't. You can, he interrupted, eyes blazing with conviction. We've survived worse. I've survived worse. And I'm not letting you face this alone. In that moment, the air seemed to vibrate with unspoken truth. Solari felt the walls she had built around herself shudder. She realized that strength wasn't just in obedience or survival. It was in trust, in connection, in allowing someone else to share the burden. With a swift motion, Darren lifted her onto his back, moving through the narrow crevices of the village as the enforcers closed in. Each step was precarious, each breath a defiance of the past. And then, just as hope seemed fleeting, they reached the cliff edge overlooking the valley below. Solari glanced down, vertigo threatening to pull her into panic, but Darren's presence grounded her. We jump, he said simply, voice calm, resolute. Together. For a heartbeat, time froze. The wind whipped around them, carrying the scent of rain and earth and smoke. Solari's heart pounded. Fear mingled with exhilaration, and she realized the paradox of survival. Sometimes to truly live, one had to surrender to the unknown. Together, she echoed, tightening her grip around him. They leapt. Gravity seized them, wind roaring in their ears. But Darren's arms held fast. The world blurred, seconds stretching into eternity, and then they hit the river below with a thunderous splash, icy water engulfing them. Underwater, Solari felt a moment of pure clarity. The past, the tradition, the burdens, they all dissolved. The river carried them forward, away from the ruins, away from expectation, toward a possibility neither had dared imagine. When they emerged, gasping and soaked, Solari pulled her mask free from the mud, staring at it for the first time with unfiltered eyes. She realized she didn't need it anymore. Not here, not now. The mask had protected her, but it had also trapped her. And she was ready to let it go. Darren, drenched and exhausted, looked at her with awe and a quiet smile. "You're free," he said, "not just from them, from the past, from yourself." Solari's lips curved faintly, tears mingling with rain. "I never thought freedom could feel like this, like a spark in the ashes." He reached out, gently taking her hand. "Then we keep moving forward, together, always." For hours they followed the river through the dense forests, each step shedding layers of fear and guilt. They spoke little, letting the silence carry the weight of unspoken confessions and newfound hope. Every glance, every touch, became a conversation in itself, intimate and unbroken. Night fell, and they made camp in a small clearing. The fire they built seemed to burn brighter than the stars above, a beacon against the darkness, against the lingering shadows of tradition and expectation. Solari stared into the flames, seeing her past, her struggles, and finally a path forward. "You know," she said quietly, "I never thought I'd survive. Not like this. Not without losing myself completely." "You didn't lose yourself," Darren replied. "You found strength in the fire, and will keep finding it, every step of the way." Solari allowed herself a small smile, the first genuine one in years. "Then, maybe we are more than the ashes of tradition. Maybe we are the ember that survives." Darren's smile met hers, and for the first time, the weight of guilt that had long haunted him seemed lighter. He realized survival wasn't just about avoiding death. It was about embracing the chance to protect, to love, and to fight for something worth living for. The night deepened around them, stars piercing the darkness like shards of silver, and as the fire crackled between them, Solari and Darren sat side by side. Bound not by duty or expectation, but by choice, by trust, by a connection forged through trials, confessions, and shared courage. In the distance, the echoes of the clan faded, unable to reach the bond they had forged. Tomorrow might bring challenges, shadows, and lingering threats, but for tonight, they existed only in the moment, in the ember of freedom that neither fire nor tradition could extinguish. And somewhere deep within the forest, the world seemed to sigh, acknowledging that two fractured souls had finally found each other, and in that finding had reclaimed their right to survive, to hope, and to truly live. The end.